It's that safe harbor that I spoke of. And we've shared a lot together over the years. And is it therapy? Perhaps. Not under the clinical definition.
But it feels therapeutic.
It's very therapeutic. Hi, this is Friday Ficks, and you are listening to Expansive Intimacy with Jim Young.
Welcome to Expansive Intimacy. I'm your host, Jim Young, and I'm on a quest to help men like you and me discover how to apply intimacy to unlock new, expansive versions of success in your relationships, your work, and your life. With each episode, we'll take another deep dive into the intimacy toolkit to show you how you can enhance your emotional intelligence, leadership abilities, and relationship skills. So settle in and open up, because it's time to get intimate. Hi, folks, and welcome to Expansive Intimacy. I'm your host, Jim Young, and this week I am joined by a friend of mine that I've met in the last couple of years. His name is Friday Ficks, and I was introduced to him by a mutual colleague and really got to enjoy him almost right away. One of the first things you notice when you meet Carl is that he definitely used to be a trial lawyer. You can tell this guy is tough and smart and sharp. You can also tell that he isn't one anymore, because his edges have really softened over the years. He still has that fire in his belly, which he stokes oftentimes by getting out doing an endurance cycling and long distance running. He really gets after it. But these days, he spends a lot of his time as a trusted advisor in organizations and nonprofits, talking about things like emotional intelligence and inspiring positive change. Carl is also a recently published author. He's one of the co-authors in an anthology called The Difference, Essays on Loss, Courage, and Personal Transformation. And his stories really cut right to the core of who we are as people and what loss can tell us and how we can transform in the most difficult moments. In the episode today, a lot of what we talk about is how men can be safe harbors for one another in moments such as those, leaning into our relational side instead of our transactional side. You'll hear that as a theme. Among one of my other favorite things I always want to share about Carl is his Friday Ficks newspaper column, which he also posts digitally on LinkedIn. I read it every Friday. He always has some wisdom to share in there. I highly recommend following Carl's once a week post. It's all he does, and it's fabulous. All the links for his website, for where you can find his book, his LinkedIn will be in the show notes. But right now, let's go ahead and get Carl into the show and hear what he has to say. Carl, welcome onto the show. I am really excited to continue our conversations we've been having over the past, I don't know, what is it now, a year and a half or so, maybe since we first met. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Jim. I'm very excited to be with you today and honored to be one of your guests.
As you may know, the first question that I always ask on this show is, how do you define intimacy?
I would define intimacy as a deep connection with others. And they could be animate or inanimate. A deep connection with your fellow humans, or a deep connection with one of your passions, whatever that might be. But you can, I think, deep connections lends to intimacy, and I tie those two together.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways we can be intimate, and I love exploring all of those. I'm sure we'll get to some of those in today's conversation. But I actually want to start at sort of the other end of the spectrum. You and I have had some conversations about different ways that guys can show up. And you talk about it in a term that I just think is really striking and helpful to look at. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about what your experience has been with what you referred to me as transactional men.
Sure. There aren't two buckets, but if you needed two buckets, you could have them divided into transactional men or relationship men. And I find the transactional ones are the ones that look at any interaction with another as simply a transaction, as if you were going to the automatic teller to pull out $50. You go, you spit your card in, you get your $50 and you leave.
Yeah.
Transactional men, I find, are like that. And if you do not serve or fit a certain purpose in that transaction, then they simply move on. Whereas relationship men, I find, if you don't want anything from the other person, I find that relationships flourish and thrive. So I try to distill it into its simplest terms, and I do at times put men into one of two buckets.
Yeah, that's a temptation for all of us, and I love to think of it as a spectrum. And I also wonder, like, have there been times in your life when you've been more in that transactional side of the spectrum and versus the relational side? I know you're very relational now.
Upon reflection, I don't think I've ever crossed over the line. There might have been some chalk on my toes, but I kind of view life through a lens that this is not that hard. Let's see what we can, how the best we can maneuver any situation. And I think, Jim, like you have a service mindset. When you come from that service mindset, it's more relationship than transactional. When I was a kid, I was a paper boy 7 days a week. And I wrote a post on that and I did a little research on that. And in the 50s, the United States Postal Service did a stamp on paper boys, and they said they were in service to their community, which made me laugh. So as a kid, I didn't realize I was really in service to the community, but I was. And even though it was transactional, I would deliver paper, I would get paid. It was more to that. To me, I was delivering the news. I was at the forefront. There was no CNN. There was no internet. There was no nothing.
Thank goodness.
I was like, yeah, I was like Walter Cronkite's mini me, the morning version.
You know what I love about that especially is that there was something more. So if I think about the transactional mindset is I deliver 50 papers, I get paid, whatever number of dollars, and then it's done. And that's my focus. If I look at it from a relational standpoint, I get to expand on what the value is, what the benefit is. In fact, it may be something way better than I could even imagine if I'm going into it open-minded and saying like, hey, let's explore this together and let me see what shows up.
Right. And I'll tell you, I saw some crazy things when I was a kid delivering papers. And, I found guys sleeping in their cars, and I would run back to my dad and say, I'm not sure that our neighbor at whatever street is okay. And my dad and I would go and check on that person. And many times they were just sleeping. There was nothing nefarious, but, always kind of looking out. For those of us in New England, we remember the blizzard of 77.
Yeah.
There were 3-4 days we were snowed in and the papers were finally delivered. When I was walking up to the house, people were looking at me like I was, Jesus walking on water. It's like news is being delivered.
Yeah.
And that was a cool feeling. It's like, I'm doing this. I'm delivering the news to these people.
Yeah. And that story of checking in at this really early age, like, hey, Dad, I think there might be something wrong here. I mean, I know you as a guy with a big heart, and that's always been there. I also heard somewhere in what you were just describing a sense of empathy, and I love to bring that in, as you know, in this show. Like my goal is to help more men access intimacy, and if there's a guy out there who's in that more that transactional mode or on that end of the spectrum, I love that we can start with having empathy for them. Like, all right, there's a reason why they're approaching life this way. It's not judge or criticize, but rather try and invite them in. I wonder, what can we be doing if we have people in our lives? And I know you mentioned to me that you have some people in your life who are in that mode. Like, what are the ways that you know of that we could start to invite them into just a little bit more relational or intimate context?
I think a lot of people are paralyzed by it, and they fear it. And I think part of the shall we say, mission would be to show them not to be afraid. And I was thinking a bit about this morning. As you know, one of my brother-in-laws disappeared in 2014. He's never been found. And my father-in-law was a very public figure. And many, many people said to me, I'd love to speak to your father-in-law, but I don't know what to say. So they defaulted to not saying anything. And my response to them was, call him and simply say, I'm thinking about you. That's it. I am thinking about you, because that doesn't put any burden on him, because his heart and life were burdened enough with the disappearance of his son. It's simply letting him know, I'm thinking about you. So I was thinking about that this morning before we came on. I was out riding my bike thinking about today's chat. And that was good advice. Personally, it's not a pat on the back, but it's such a simple line. I'm thinking about you. And I believe a lot of people are paralyzed by that. Another example is everybody goes to wakes, and you don't want to, that's really not on your to-do list, but you do it. And you may not want to do it, but when you leave, to the person, you're probably saying, I'm so glad I did that, because it's not about you. It's about comforting the family. So I think if one of our goals is to just show men and others that you don't have to fear this, that a few simple words are very powerful. I'm thinking of you. That's 4 words. That's it. And that could, potentially change somebody's day or life.
Yeah.
Because they may not feel alone.
I love that. I mean, in this show, I talk about, we're going to open up the intimacy toolkit. And sometimes those tools are really simple. It's just an outreach that says, I'm thinking of you, to let somebody know. And we don't have to overcomplicate it.
No. And again, let's distill it into its simplest terms. There are you can make a huge impact with just a few words, either to the good or to the bad. And you need to be mindful of that.
Or with our silence, right? If we care about somebody and we don't find any way to let them know, they don't understand maybe that we care.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jim, one of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes, and there are a lot of them, but probably my top Martin Luther King quote is, in the end, I will remember not the words of my enemies, but the silence of my friends. And I have 2 daughters, and I've tried to say to them, if you see something that's not right, you need to say something, because the silence of your friends, as mentioned by MLK, it can be deafening and can be destructive.
Yeah. It's a really loving move, right? Is to share with somebody sometimes the hard news that we need to deliver of, hey, I care about you, and I see you're making a decision that doesn't seem healthy, or whatever that might be. And sometimes our friends are our best mirror.
100%, without a doubt.
So speaking of friends, I know you, Carl, as a friend. We're new friends, and I'm excited to be included in that cadre, because I know you've got some really deep friendships. In fact, I know just in the past week you were celebrating something pretty cool, and I'd love you to just kind of share what the long arc of a relational man can look like, from the dead end kids on to last weekend. Just
sure.
Give us a flavor of that.
Sure. So the Dead End Kids is a motley group of now 60-year-old guys. And many of us met in grade school. There are some guys that are part of this group that met in kindergarten when they were 5 years old. So we all kind of grew up together. We played football together in high school. That was kind of the common denominator. We played poker on Friday nights. And one of the guys in the group, she came down. We had irritated her. And she said, "You're all a bunch of dead end kids. You'll never amount to anything," quote, end quote. So we adopted the moniker DEK, Dead End Kids. And we've stayed in touch.
In the t-shirts.
And we've got t-shirts. We've got everything. So we've stayed in touch, and it's generational now. We all have kids, and the kids are friends, which it tickles me to death and warms my heart to see that. But we've supported each other. We all graduated from high school in 1981. So that is 42 years ago. We've supported each other's journeys, both personally and professionally. There's 1 or 2 divorces in the group. We've been there for that. One of the guys did die last year, and we supported each other. In fact, he lived in California at the time. We were out there for his second marriage. It was wonderful in 2018. His wife had a service out there out west. We couldn't get there. And some of the guys were, a little down in the mouth. I said, let's just do a service here. So we did that in September of last year to celebrate our friend's life. And for those that couldn't go out west. So it's just, we've argued, we've bickered, but at the bottom line is we love each other tremendously and we've supported each other. And we all celebrated last week, our collective 60th birthdays in Nashville. And we wore our Dead End Kid t-shirts, and that got a lot of clicks and a lot of photos and a lot of what's that all about? And a lot of laughs, a little scorn, but who cares? Yeah. But we had a good time.
Yeah, what an amazing mix of all sorts of things and over such a long arc. And one of the things that first jumped out at me in that story as you were telling it is, I think there's this misguided notion that a lot of men have about what we're supposed to be like. And in my book title, it's called Expansive Intimacy, How Tough Guys, in quotes, defeat burnout. I'm talking about my story of burnout and other men who've gone through that experience and what it is to be tough. And I think about tough and a couple of things that come, that you said, I'm like, oh, football player, check. Definitely a tough guy. Hangs out with the guys and plays poker, check. Right? That's a really manly kind of thing in our culture. And then there's this, I'm going to be with you in moments of grief. And I'm going to be a supportive, nurturing friend to you. I'm going to express my love to you. These are things that we don't generally ascribe to manly as a descriptor. And I just love that juxtaposition in there that actually the best is when we can combine all of those things. So I just want to reflect that to you in case you haven't already, reflected it enough.
Yeah. And examples of that vary in this group. I mean, I'll give you one now. One of our friends was going through a divorce and it was a really, really tough time for him. He's a huge Rolling Stones fan. The Stones came to Hartford and I said to one of the other Dead End kids, I said, hey, we need to help this guy. Let's rally the troops here and let's take him. And he was dating at the time. And I said, let's take him and his new girlfriend to the Stones. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did. We had, 3 or 4 couples and we took him to the Stones because he needed a little love and he needed a little Mick Jagger, and that's what we gave him. And I'll text these guys, are you okay? If I think something is awry. A friend of mine, he moonlights, he has a small farm. And when my mom died in 2014, I was cleaning out her house and it really sucked. And I called him and I said, hey, brother, are you at your farm? He said, yeah. I said, I'm coming down. And we sat around, we had a few beers and we shot the shit. And he was there for me because, cleaning out my mother's house, the food, the furniture, the inanimate stuff. Okay. But when I got to the fridge, I saw, okay, this is what my mother ate last. It's like, yeah, this is really not good. So he's the first guy I thought of because his farm was or is a mile or 2 from where my parents lived. And we still remember it. In fact, I'll tie it all together, Jim. My mom was born in 1936. Before I met him, I picked up a 6-pack of Coors beer, regular Coors beer. They were vintage 1936 bottles. And I sat with him and I said, Ray, look at this bottle. This was a vintage bottle from the year my mother was born. I said, this was meant to be. And it aligned. And we, in fact, he mentioned it last week in Nashville. That was 9 years ago, but he was there for me. These guys, we'd be there for each other at any time of the day or night.
These are the real gifts of expansive intimacy, is that in a moment where you're grieving, you don't know, what to do next because feels like too much. Like, I got somebody. I can pick up the phone and I can go over, we can have a couple of beers, we can shoot the shit, and I can feel connected again. And I can continue that. And that he could show up for you and just, I don't know what he did. I'd love to know. Like, did he just sit with you? Did he grieve with you? What did he do that deepened that
He,
intimacy?
he sat and he listened, which, as we know, is not that easy to actually engage in active listening. I'm mindful of, I love this. I love Simon and Garfunkel, the line in The Boxer, men hear what they want to hear and disregard the rest. That really refers to where we started this conversation. I think that describes a transactional man. A transactional man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. But my friend just sat there and listened to me. And there were long, pregnant pauses. It wasn't, me riffing 30 straight minute monologue. It's a beautiful farm. We just sat there and we laughed, told some stories. I shed a tear or two, and he just made space for me.
Yeah, sometimes that's in one way, it's the simplest thing to do, the most profound thing that we can do. And it also can be so difficult for many of us that it just feels uncomfortable to sit there in silence and not have something to say, not try to fix the situation, which FIX, not the spelling of your last name, which actually I want to jump into that. You have a fantastic weekly column called Friday Ficks, and I love the Friday Ficks. I read it every single week, and it does so many things for me. For one thing, you almost always bring in a musical reference, which I love, as you know.
I have to.
Yeah, but I would just love to know, what got you started on this project, writing the Friday Fix. If you're listening to this and you want to check it out online, LinkedIn is a great place to find it. You may have other places where you distribute it, but I'd just love to hear more about why do you do that?
I do it for a number of reasons. One is during the pandemic, there was this avalanche of apocalyptic news, and that was it. It was just bad, 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 bad. And this was my literary Occupy Wall Street. I'm not by nature a protester, but it kind of pissed me off that there was no good news out there. So I started writing some posts and just kind of sharing some things that I've learned along the way. And the thought of tightening them up really was inspired by when I was a kid, my parents would take us to church. And, you'd have a priest who would drone on for 15 minutes and say absolutely nothing. You had another who inside of 3 minutes could deliver this really tight eulogy with one little nugget of wisdom or a takeaway, which you might be able to rely on for the following week.
Yeah.
And, I've joked about this when the clergy person's up there says, but we'll get to that later. You're like, oh, there's a later to this. We're already 10 minutes into this, land your plane. So I started writing these posts and I figured I'd riff on my name. It's really designed to give somebody a little fix, perhaps a little nugget of wisdom, perhaps a teachable moment that may help them in the following week. And a lot of it is just things that I've done over the years where, I've taken missteps, how I've learned from them. And there's an authenticity to them that is resonating with people. I'm doing leadership training, talking about emotional intelligence. I tell the story, and I just wrote about flipping off a trooper in New Jersey when I was 24 years old. That's an emotional midget right there. But I learned from that. So I do it just to perhaps share a nugget of wisdom or some things that I learned that might be helpful to others, including their children or people in their families.
One of the things that I always strive to do in my work is to help people find the other resources, because I certainly am not the guy who's going to tell everybody all the answers around how to create more intimacy in their lives. And Friday Fix to me is an expansive intimacy tool. It is a wonderful way to connect to real life stories about how we can be more connected, more, in our own purpose, how we can grow. I love that story about flipping off the trooper. That was, I think, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And today I have I have Love is the Drug by Roxy Music in my head. Thank you to your post as well. I actually listened to it before we jumped on because I'm like, I
Yeah.
love that song. And I totally thought that was Joe Jackson for some reason in my head. I'm like, oh, that's Joe Jackson or no, Elvis Costello. I think I was thinking I was like, oh no, that's Roxy Music. It's so good.
Roxy. Yeah. And I wrote one a few weeks ago based on rereading your book. When I read Expansive Intimacy, it really gave me pause because when I pivoted out of the practice of law, I named my company No Surrender. And on its face, it's like, okay, what is this guy? Mr. Hardass here, Mr. No Surrender, Mr. Weakness is pain leaving the body vibe. No. And I wrote about it. It's the Bruce Springsteen song from his Born in the USA album, which I listened to in law school. And so that's where the name comes from. So I wrote about it just so it's an interesting story. I find it interesting and people might want to know about it because after I read your book, I'm thinking, this is not what I wanted to convey, or I'm hopefully not conveying that. But your book led me to at least one Friday Fix, and I'm sure there are more in there, and they'll be forthcoming.
Yeah, but and we have that musical bit in common because you were commenting before we jumped on to actually record this morning about listening to the playlist that goes along with my book. And you use music all the time. I think we've probably named at least 6 different musical acts so far in this recording. And I'd love to know, what is the role that music has played and continues to play for you in life in terms of creating connection, and how can other people access that?
I have found safety, for lack of a better word, in music. It's almost a safe harbor because lyrics. I'm in tune with lyrics. Pardon the pun. I just like to listen to them, what they mean. I think the mark of a good song is its staying power. I was discussing this the other day. The world is in upheaval. And one of my favorite songs is White Rabbit. That's 50 years old. And there's a line in there, when logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead. And some of the things that are going on, you're like, where's the logic here? Where's the proportion? Everything is at times illogical and disproportionate. So there's some lines that are incredible. Our friend, our fellow DEK who passed away, I did the eulogy. And I'll tell you 2 things about him. He was a huge Dire Straits fan in high school. He was also a Led Zeppelin fan in 5th grade. And I said to the congregation, raise your hand if you were a Led Zeppelin fan in 5th grade. Nobody did. I said, well, Steve was. So he went to William and Mary. He came back first semester and said, I heard a band on campus. They're going to be huge. They're called Rapid Eye Movement. This is 1981. Wow. They later became REM. But I raised the Dire Straits thing because in the eulogy, I ended my eulogy by quoting lines from Sultans of Swing. Mm-hmm. And I've got it right here because I wanted to raise it. It says, and the man steps right up to the microphone and says at last, just as the time bell rings, good night, now it's time to go home. And I said, Steve has gone home. So I ended.
Literally just got goosebumps.
Yeah. And I said, the last line is, then he makes it fast with one more thing. And I weave that in, but I started by mentioning Dire Straits and I ended by quoting that line. And so Sultans of Swing has always reminded me of Steve, and it will forever remind me of Steve. So music is temporal and we can share things. You can go to a show, the Rolling Stones show that I mentioned to you, that will never be taken away. And our friend who was going through the tough time has mentioned it, that was really helpful. So to me, it's a safe harbor. When I was prepping witnesses before they testified, I'd give them a safe harbor. I'd say, when you're under oath and you think, you're stuck or the world is crumbling around you, here's your safe harbor, find it. And I find music, frankly, to be a safe harbor.
Yeah, I do as well. And I in particular like the notion of a safe harbor, because I think when we talk about men stepping into intimacy, it can feel unsafe. and how do we do it best? And so I could start off by sharing with somebody about, I'm going to see the Foo Fighters in 2 weeks. And, if I know that they're a Foo Fighters fan, or maybe not, maybe they're like, oh yeah, I saw this other band, and we can start to get into a conversation where now maybe we have an opening to go even deeper. Cause I, as you know, from our conversations, I don't like to stay at the headline news level. I want to drop down into, into the real stuff.
Well, that's how you build rapport. I
Yeah.
mean, you find, at times it can be transparent, and you don't want to be comically transparent. And I think there a lot of that's in the transactional stuff. They'll make cocktail talk. To your point, the 30,000 foot talk. It's like, yeah, we're not getting anywhere here. This is a joke. How you doing? Oh, I'm great. Everybody's great,
Right.
but they're
Fine.
really not great.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Yeah, busy, crazy busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Unless you're the Pope, you may not be that busy. But I digress. So you build rapport, and that's you find a common denominator, and then does it take effort? Yeah, but it shouldn't be looked upon that way. I loved going to see you do your improv, and unlike Awake, I wanted to go, but like Awake, when I was driving home from your show, I'm like, damn, I am stoked that I went and saw that. That was awesome.
So for all the listeners here who decide that they might want to check out one of my improv shows sometime, just know that it's going to feel like Awake.
No, I mean, I was
exact same energy.
Yeah, like this is going to be good, and you delivered. And I was driving home, like, wow, yeah, that was good. But was that work? I guess, yeah. I mean, it was 50 or 60 miles away, but that's not work to me. If you're doing something you want to do,
yeah. And then so much to know that you were driving up and driving back, 100 miles round trip. Just come up and see me and meet me. We hadn't met before in person. And for you to come see me doing one of the things that I love to do the most, expressing myself, creating laughter. And as you know from the book, I consider laughter to be a huge source of spiritual intimacy and experiential intimacy, all these different ways that we can connect. And it really warmed my heart that night to have you show up, and a buddy of mine from high school was there, and it was so cool.
Oh yeah, and we had a nice post show get together, and that was a great evening. And I'm fortunate to have gone up and seen you.
And you took a risk, right? Because you came up by yourself, right, into this place. You didn't know anybody except for me. We've had a few Zoom calls before, and online interactions, and you're meeting my teammates, and you're meeting my high school buddy and his family. A couple of my college friends were there as well. And at one point, I remember looking over. We're in the bar next door after the show, and there's all this buzz around. I'm kind of, I walked in, a lot of folks that I know were there, and you're sitting at the corner of the bar, not knowing anybody. And I'm like, oh, I don't want Carl to be sitting there not knowing anybody. And I also want to talk to a lot of people. So I'm like, Carl, come on over here. And you just stepped in. So you took a lot of risks that night that maybe don't feel like them to you, but I see them as risks. Like, I'm going to go into this place, and now I'm going to get into conversations with a bunch of strangers. It was so fun watching you connect with those people in all these different ways.
Yeah. And I believe it was your college roommate's wife went to the same undergrad as I did.
That's right.
Providence College. So immediately there was common ground there, and the conversation just flows.
Yeah.
Again, if I didn't want anything out of that conversation, I was just enjoying it being in the moment.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We probably have time for one more question. I definitely wanted to get to this before we wrap up, and I want to give you a chance to kind of share some of what you're up to in the world that's helping create some some intimacy in different ways. But you told me a story about a Friday routine that you have, a ritual that you have with a friend that to me is just one of the simplest and warmest examples of connection that I've heard in a while. I'd just love for you to share just a little bit of that.
Sure. A buddy of mine and I, for many, many, many years, have basically a standing Friday date at 9 a.m. We meet at a local Italian club. This club was founded 60 or 70 years ago by Sicilian immigrants. Mm-hmm. And it's a private club, air quotes around that, which means you pay $100 a year and they give you a little pod to get into the clubhouse. And they have some of the best espresso around for, I think it's now $2, but we've seen that go up. But it's still very good espresso. And we sit together, and sometimes we are nonstop talking. Other times we're just staring straight ahead. We kind of share each other's wins. We share each other's, if we have struggles, we talk about them. We wrestle some stuff to the ground. Again, that's generational. I've seen his kids grow up to be, incredible contributing members of society, and, ups and downs. And we have fun rivalries. For instance, both of his children have graduated from the University of Alabama. My youngest is headed in August to Auburn University. For those that aren't aware, Auburn and Alabama, they don't get along.
Right.
And my buddy and I are now having a joke about that. He says, I don't know if we can still be friends given this, this rivalry, but it's just something I look forward to. It doesn't happen every week because life interferes, but it's there. We know it's that safe harbor that I spoke of.
Yeah.
And we've shared a lot together over the years. And is it therapy? Perhaps. Not under the clinical definition.
But it feels therapeutic.
It's very therapeutic. We solve a lot of issues, and I get his opinion on things and he gets mine, and vice versa. And it's, there's a cacophony of noise behind us. A lot of older retired Sicilians playing cards. I have no idea what they're saying. I don't speak Sicilian, but it doesn't matter because we're just in the moment. And even when I was, hardcore practicing law, I would be conscious of that Friday. And many times depositions, for instance, a guy would say, let's start Friday at 10. Well, I can't. We got to do it at 11. I wouldn't tell him why, but it was because I wanted to be at the club at 9 to meet my buddy.
I love it.
It's almost sacrosanct. It's just, this is the time.
Yeah. In a world where there are so many people out there who are lonely, and there's some studies. If you haven't availed yourself of this information, dear listener, Google loneliness epidemic or any variation of that, and there is so much loneliness going on, so much disconnection, so many people who don't have friends, and it feels really hard sometimes. And I love, Carl, how you gave us several examples of the ways that you have stayed connected and fostered and maintained friendships, and the huge benefits that it has for you. Really, really great stuff.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, in this age of texting, it's a blessing and a curse. I have a friend, he's got some medical issues, and I was out riding a week or two ago, and I was thinking of him. I got off my bike. I texted him, sending you love. That was it. 3 words.
Mm-hmm.
And he responded with the heart emoji. So it didn't take me a lot of time. It didn't take him a lot of time, but I wanted him to know that I was sending love his way. So that's right. That's the blessing side of texting. I find, it wasn't a phone call. I didn't have to pen a letter to him. It was just sending you love. 3 very powerful words.
Yeah, exactly. Very powerful words. Carl, I would love to keep going, but we got to wrap up. So I would love to just have you, give you a moment to share. What are the things that you're doing out in the world that you want people to know about, and how can they find you?
Well, you can find me at carlficks.com, CARLFICKS.com. And what I'm doing, Jim, a lot of is leadership training. I'm fascinated with that and the dynamic, and especially emotional intelligence. One of the skills is relationship management. And that's what we're talking about. And that's about connecting at a deep level. And it involves time, it involves effort, and it involves know-how. And the know-how is the emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management. I constantly tell my kids, you need to be aware of what's going on around you, why you are in a certain situation, and have eyes in the back of your head. And I think that will help you as you navigate life. So I'm really into the self-awareness and self-management, because on the self-management side, I don't think you can lead others if you don't have your own house in order.
Yeah.
And that has many levels, including a fitness and wellness component, which I'm a little compulsive about, perhaps too much so, but it gets my mind right. The things I solve on my bike when I'm riding are incredible. It's my time. That's where I do my best thinking.
And I know for you, there is this multi-level health system that you have of your physical health, of your relational health, which we heard a ton about today, and how that bleeds into all sorts of things, whether that's your parenting or your marriage or your friendships. I show up, Jim, better when I do that. I show up as a better husband, as a better father, as a better friend, and a better colleague. Yeah. I just know that I'm a better person when I do that. So it is important to me, because I don't look at it as selfish. I look at it as a gift to those that I love. Yeah. And so if you're listening and you hear something that you love from what Carl's doing, reach out to him. I'll make sure that there are links in the show notes for you to find where you can reach him. He's doing some amazing work helping out leaders. Carl, thanks a ton for being on the show today and for sharing everything that you shared with us.
Thank you, Jim. And I really appreciate it. And for everybody listening, buy Jim's book. It's transformative.
Thanks, Carl.
All right. Thank you.
Hey guys, it's Jim. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're enjoying these episodes and are wanting to bring a little bit more of those relational skills into your work and your life, get in touch. I keep a couple of slots open for one-on-one coaching with guys to help them develop their emotional intelligence, their relationship skills, their leadership ability, all so that they could live the most successful and happy lives possible. Just email me at jim@thecenteredcoach.com. We can have a short call to see how I might be able to help you. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I really look forward to seeing you next week on Expansive Intimacy with me, Jim Young. I'd also love your help with expanding intimacy even further. Would you take a minute right now to rate the show and write a review? It's the best way for us to bring more people into the conversation. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.